thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar today, organized under the context of the OECD UNEP Global PFC Group. So these OECD PFAS webinars are an opportunity to bring different types of information to those working on PFASs and to support the shift to safer alternatives. So you will find also recordings of all many of the past webinars on the OECD's PFAS website. So I encourage you to also look there for previous webinars if you missed the live ones. So today, with a big thanks to Canada and the U.S. for providing webinars on their risk reduction initiatives and the latest developments on them on various PFASs in the two countries. So we'll have first a presentation from Sandi Moser from Environment and Climate Change Canada on the risk management of PFAS in Canada, and then we'll have a presentation from the United States Environmental Protection Agency from Hannah Holsinger on the EPA's PFAS action plan and some background on PFASs. So each of those presentations will be about 25 minutes, and then we'll have around 10 minutes for questions following the two presentations. So yes, if you can please mute your lines if you are not the speaker. And Sandi, I'd like to turn it over to you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much for having us here. It's morning here, but I'm not sure what the timing is for everyone on the phone, but good day to you all. Thank you for having us here to talk about the risk management of PFAS in Canada. Oh, there we go. Okay. So today what I'm going to talk to you about is I'm going to give you a really high-level overview of Canada's Chemicals Management Plan, just so then you understand some of the terminology that I'm using through the rest of the presentation. Then I'll get into the prohibition of certain toxic substances regulations that we have in Canada and our proposed amendments to those regulations that are covering some of the, well, all of the perfluorinated substances that we're dealing with today. So starting with a really high-level overview of chemicals management in Canada, I'm not going to go over this slide in detail. It was more just to give an idea of all of the work that Canada has been doing in chemicals management, starting in 1975 with the Environmental Contaminants Act. Most of the work that we do in our group follows the top end of that arrow. So right now we've been working on the chemicals management plan that we've had since 2006, and we're in the third stage of that plan that brings us in through 2021. So we've been doing a lot of work over time, but that just gives you an overview of the work that we've been doing. But more in detail for the chemicals management plan, the objective of that plan is to protect Canadians and their environment from the risks of harmful chemicals. The principal legislation that we use here in Canada for managing chemicals is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or CEPA. I'll try not to use acronyms when I'm here, but just in case I slip into one, that's what CEPA means. The Act covers a range of activities that can affect human health and the environment and acts to address any pollution issues not covered by other federal laws. The plan itself integrates across federal government departments to ensure appropriate assessment and management of chemicals. By that I mean we here at Environment and Climate Change Canada work on environmental issues, but we also work closely with Health Canada on health aspects, as well as the Pest Management Regulatory Agency on pest control products. So we try and integrate across all of our departments. Both the plan, the plan itself includes comprehensive stakeholder engagement throughout our processes as well. This is another slide. I'm not really going to go too much in detail, but it does show the progression of how substances are managed in Canada, starting with information gathering. Then we have a publication of a draft risk assessment and also a document called the Risk Management Scope document that's published for a 60-day public comment period. And then we have a final risk assessment that makes a final conclusion as to whether a substance is toxic or not. If it is toxic, it is proposed and finally added to the list of toxic substances. And then there's also a publication of a proposed risk management instrument and a final risk management instrument. So instrument is usually a regulation. So I wanted to just cover this one because I talk a little bit about the assessment report. So just so you know, we do the assessment report, they get published, and then after that, if it's toxic, we're mandated through our act to put together a risk management instrument within 24 months and then finalize it within 18. So now that I've covered that, like, overall overarching information about our chemicals management plan, I wanted to get into the more specifics about what we're doing for the perfluorinated substances. The Prohibition of Certain Toxic Substances regulations is a multi-substance risk management instrument that's used to prohibit the manufacture, use, sale, offer for sale, or import of certain toxic substances and products that contain them with a limited number of exemptions. I meant to write this down before I came in, but I think we currently have about 26 substances listed on the regulations. I should say substances or groups of substances. So they do cover a whole bunch of different substances and different uses. They're generally used to control substances that are found to be very harmful, so toxic, persistent, and bioaccumulative, and as such, they're the main tool to implement Canada's obligation under the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. So already on those regulations, we have a bunch of substances, as I mentioned, and included in those are PFOS, PFOA, and long-chain PFCAs. For all three of those, when I'm throughout the rest of the presentation, when I mention PFOS, for us in Canada, that means perfluorooctane sulfonate. It's salts and precursors, and PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid. It's salts and its precursors, and long-chain PFCAs is long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids. They're salts and they're precursors. The precursors part, just in case anyone is confused with the terminology, if you are familiar at all with the current listing or the new listing for PFOA on the Stockholm Convention, it's similar to the PFOA-related compounds, that they would be considered quite to be similar to each other. So all three of those substance groupings are already listed on the Prohibition of Certain Toxic Substances regulations, but in October 2018, we published a notice of intent to amend the regulations. It was part of a commitment to put in place stronger regulatory controls to address contaminants that pose a threat to the southern resident killer whale. So the notice of intent was published in October, and then a consultation document was published in December of 2018 that outlined the proposed regulatory approach for amending the regulations. The proposed approach is to further restrict the manufacture, use, sale, offer for sale, and import of PFOS, PFOA, long-chain PFCAs, HBCD, and PBDEs except for DECA-BDE by eliminating all current exemptions. For DECA-BDE, we have proposed to include a time-limited exemption for the import and use of DECA-BDE in automotive replacement parts until 2036. And then finally, the regulatory approach also proposed to prohibit the manufacture, use, sale, offer for sale, and import of DP and DBDPE. I included it all here, but just so everyone's aware, HBCD, PBDEs, DP, and DBDPE are all flame retardants, but I just wanted you to see what the entire package was. The rest of the presentation, I'll just be focusing on PFOS, PFOA, and long-chain PFCAs. So PFOS has been regulated in Canada for a while. Back in July of 2006, the Ecological Screening Assessment Report was published, finding that they were toxic to the environment. And in 2008, the department published the perfluorooctane sulfonate and its salts and certain other compounds regulations. Those regulations were, I'm not sure the whole history of why they were published separately from the prohibition of certain toxic substances regulations, but by October 2016, we decided to roll that that prohibition into the prohibition of certain toxic substances regulations. So they have been prohibited since 2008, but in a separate regulation, and then that was just moved into the prohibition of certain toxic substances regulations. So PFOS has never been manufactured in Canada and was primarily used as a surfactant in the metal plating industry and in aqueous film-forming foams used in firefighting. It's historically been used in a wide variety of surface treatments for things like textiles, leather, carpet, and so forth, and it provides water, oil, dirt, and grease repellent properties. There are still limited uses allowed under our current regulations in photography, like films, papers, and printing plates, and in semiconductor manufacturing and photolithography applications. So this slide just shows you what our current exemptions are and what our proposed amendments are. So the current exemptions for PFOS, so PFOS is prohibited except for the import, manufacture, use, sale, and offer for sale of PFOS or a product containing it if it's designed for use in photoresist or anti-reflective coatings for photolithography, for when it's designed for use in photographic films, papers, and printing plates, the import and use of PFOS in aqueous film-forming foam present in a military vehicle or military firefighting vehicle contaminated during a foreign military operation, and the use of aqueous film-forming foam that contains residual levels of PFOS at a maximum concentration of 10 ppm. So that's all what in Canada is currently allowed, but under our proposed amendments, we're currently proposing to remove all of these exemptions since the use of PFAS has been declining or globally, or for some of these applications, it's been discontinued altogether. So we feel that, well, we felt that for the proposal that we could remove all of these exemptions. So for PFOA in Canada, in August of 2016, we had a publication of the final screening assessment report that found that perfluorooctanoic acid, its salts and its precursors, were toxic to the environment. And in October of 2016, they were added to the regulations. They were never manufactured in Canada, but imported and maybe continue to be imported in aqueous film-forming foam used in firefighting applications and in manufactured items such as textiles, paper, packaging, and electrical and electronic equipment. As with the other substances, it was primarily used as water, dirt, and grease repellents and as surfactants and surface treatment agents. So PFOA, as I mentioned, is already on the regulations, so it's prohibited except for its import, use, sale, and offer for sale in aqueous film-forming foam for firefighting, for the use or import of a product if the product is for personal use, and for import, use, sale, and offer for sale of manufactured items containing PFOA. So things that like nano coatings, surface treatment paper, surface treated paper and cardboard packaging for commercial and consumer use, textiles, membranes intended for medical textiles, semiconductors, spare parts for the transportation sector. So those are all currently exempted from our regulations. the proposed amendment in our consultation document were to remove all of these exemptions, as a lot of alternatives are available for these uses. And finally, with long-chain PFCAs, the final screening assessment report was also published in August of 2016, and the long-chain PFCAs, their salts and precursors, were added to the regulations in October of 2016. Like PFOA, they were never manufactured in Canada, but were imported and may continue to be imported in aqueous film-forming foam, used in firefighting applications and in manufactured items. They were also primarily used as water, soil, and grease repellents, and also as surfactants and surface treatment agents. The current exemptions, it follows very closely with the PFOA exemptions, so it's still allowed to be imported, used, sold, and offered for sale in aqueous film-forming foam for firefighting, products for personal use, and manufactured items, same type of uses as listed for PFOA. And like PFOA, we've also recommended that we remove these exemptions, as most of the uses have been either discontinued or alternatives are currently available. So the next steps for our amendments to the regulations, we had the comments for the consultation document were requested by February 18th, 2019, which is passed already. We also had the COP9, the Conference of the Parties for the Stockholm Convention, in which the listing for PFOS was reviewed, and the listing for PFOA was also was proposed and was recommended and was agreed to. So we're going to use the comments that we received during the consultation period and take into account the final listings for PFAS and PFOA. When we develop through the summer and fall, we'll develop our proposed amendments to the regulations. We hope to publish the proposed amendments to the regulations in winter 2020, and then the final amendments to the regulations would follow about a year later, so around winter 2021.
Laura, if you could pass the presenter rights to Hannah. Great. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Hannah is from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and she'll provide some background on PFAS and also on EPA's PFAS action plan. So Hannah, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Can you see my slides?
I can, if you can just make them full screen.
Great.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right. So thank you also for having me here this morning, or for whichever time it is where y'all folks are, to present on a little bit of background on PFAS and some previous actions the U.S. EPA has taken, as well as our recently released PFAS action plan that we released in February of this year. So I just have a couple really brief overview slides of PFAS, which folks on the line may be familiar, so I'll try to go through these fairly quickly. So what are PFAS? Polyfluoroalkyl substances, and they're a group of man-made chemicals. They've been in use in the U.S. at least since the 1940s. There's many PFAS chemicals within the PFAS family, including PFOA, PFOS, and Gen X chemicals. These are some three that have been making a lot of headlines in the U.S. in recent years. Due to their strong carbon-fluorine bonds, they can be very persistent in the environment. Some of these we don't have a known half-life in the environment, so some of them have degradation periods for many years. Two of the most studied are PFOA and PFOS. Where are they found? So PFAS, they've been used in a wide array of consumer products like cookware, food packaging, stain and water repellents that have been used in fabrics, carpet, and outerwear like raincoats and such. PFAS manufacturing, PFAS can be found where PFAS is manufactured or processed, as well as at airport and military installments that use firefighting foams containing PFAS. Some of the others these uses can be contributors to PFAS release in air, soil, and water, including sources of drinking water. How can this impact humans? Because of their widespread use and their environmental persistence, most people have been exposed to PFAS chemicals. We find it within the blood of the U.S. population through some of the work by our health agencies. PFAS, some of them can accumulate in the body for long periods of time. Some have half-lives within the body of days up to years. And there's evidence that exposure to certain PFAS may lead to adverse human health impacts. So I'll move on to give a brief overview of some of EPA's previous work on PFAS. EPA has taken steps under multiple statutory authorities granted to the EPA by Congress to understand and address these chemicals. For example, some PFAS are no longer manufactured in the U.S. as a result of the EPA's PFOA stewardship program, in which eight major chemical manufacturers agreed to phase out the use of PFOA and PFOA-related chemicals in their products and emissions from their facilities. All 8 of these companies met the PFOA stewardship programs by 2015. The EPA has issued various significant new use rules to guard against the unreviewed reintroduction and new use through domestic production or import of certain PFAS chemicals in the U.S. EPA has also worked with states and local communities to understand the levels of PFAS within drinking water. So we use authorities under the Safe Drinking Water Act to monitor for 6 unregulated PFAS chemicals in drinking water systems. As well as in 2016, EPA issued a drinking water lifetime health advisory for PFOA and PFOS of 70 parts per trillion individually or combined. So this is a non-regulatory value, but it provides a number where EPA does not anticipate any adverse human health risks below that level. We've got some other work. EPA continues to work to advance their research on PFAS. There's a lot of ongoing work in our research on us to better understand the health impacts of different PFAS, the different exposure pathways, as well as the different options for treatment and remediation and removal. EPA has announced the initiation of assessments for 5 additional PFAS chemicals, including PFHXA, PFNA, PFDA, PFHXS, and PFBA. EPA released draft toxicity assessments for Gen X chemicals and PFBS. And to date, EPA continues to provide technical assistance to many areas across the country that are facing PFAS contamination. Moving on to the EPA PFAS Action Plan. So a lot of this began last May. It's about a year ago, EPA convened a 2-day National Leadership Summit on PFAS in Washington, D.C. We brought together over 200 federal, state, tribal, and local leaders, as well as representatives from industry, NGOs from across the country to discuss next steps to move forward on issues with PFAS. Following the summit, EPA hosted a series of community engagements across the United States in the summer of 2018. So this is where we went to communities that were directly impacted by PFAS. We interacted with over 1,000 people during these community engagements, and these were all across the U.S., ranging from New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Colorado, North Carolina, Kansas, Michigan, and we also worked with tribal folks out in Spokane, Washington. At the time of the PFAS Leadership Summit in May, we opened a docket in which the public could submit comments to EPA. We want to make sure those that were unable to attend a community engagement were able to still provide comment to the EPA on this action plan. We received approximately 120,000 comments from the public, and this was open throughout the summer until I think about 30 days after our last community engagement. The purpose of the plan was to provide EPA's first multimedia, multi-program national research management and risk communication plan to address a challenge like PFAS. So just to state that this really touches every office at EPA. So this is a truly across agency product. The plan responds to the extensive public input that we received from the National Leadership Summit, the community engagements, as well as the public comments we received via the docket. And the plan provides the necessary tools to assist states, tribal communities, as well as local communities in addressing the risks from PFAS. Now I'll move on to talk about some highlighted actions within the action plan. So this is a high-level overview. So the action plan is on our website. It's epa.gov/PFAS. You can find that action plan, and that provides more of the details as well as some timelines as far as moving forward on some of these actions. So for a highlighted action for drinking water, EPA is committed to following the maximum contaminant level rulemaking process as established by the Safe Drinking Water Act. And as a next step, EPA will propose a regulatory determination for PFOA, PFAS by the end of 2019. So this falls in line with some of our mandated activities at EPA through the Safe Drinking Water Act. Every 5 years, we put out a list of contaminants we are concerned about that may be found in drinking water. PFOA, PFAS were on the most recent list. Every 5 years, we have to make a determination whether we will or will not move forward regulating at least 5 contaminants on that list. EPA has committed that this next round of regulatory determination will include PFOA and PFOS. So that will be coming out at the end of 2019, a preliminary regulatory determination. EPA is also committed to gathering and evaluating information on other PFAS to determine if regulation is appropriate. For highlighted actions for cleanup, most recently, a couple weeks ago, EPA released a draft interim cleanup recommendations for public comment. This was, draft interim groundwater cleanup recommendations, and this is intended to provide clear and consistent guidance for federal cleanup programs. EPA is also initiating the regulatory development process for listing certain PFAS as hazardous substances. To obtain additional information for monitor PFAS occurrence in drinking water, as previously mentioned, EPA has the authority to monitor up to 30 unregulated contaminants in drinking water on every 5 years. For our next unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, EPA is committed to including additional PFAS within that monitoring framework. The last 6 PFAS were monitored under our third list, and our current UCMR 4 is ongoing right now. There's no PFAS on that list, but EPA is committed to including additional PFAS under that next round of monitoring so we can get a better understanding of PFAS occurrence in drinking water across the nation. There's many, many activities ongoing with research. EPA continues to expand the research scientific foundation for understanding and managing risks from PFAS. There's a range of research, including understanding toxicity and the impacts of human health from a range of PFAS, understanding the different exposure routes from PFAS, ultimately understanding the risk of what that means, as well as identifying effective treatment and remediation actions, including drinking water treatment and remediation of different other environmental media. There's actions ongoing within our toxics office, including the consideration of adding PFAS to the toxic release inventory. EPA is also issuing a supplemental proposal to guard against the unreviewed reintroduction and new use through domestic production through the domestic production or import of certain PFAS chemicals in the United States. Enforcement actions, EPA has authorities through different statutes, when appropriate, to address exposures in the environment and assist states with their enforcement activities. For risk communication, EPA is working collaboratively with our states and tribes and local communities to develop risk communication toolbox, and this will provide a multimedia materials and messaging to help assist federal agencies, the states, tribes, and local partners in communicating the risks of PFAS to their public. And for our next steps, as EPA works to implement the PFAS action plan, we continue to coordinate with many entities, again, including our other federal agency partners, states, tribes, local governments, different water utilities, and different industries, as well as the public. As EPA makes progress on specific actions within the action plan, those updates are included on EPA's PFAS website, and that's epa.gov/PFAS. Any new actions that are recently completed will be updated in that central location. So the specific items outlined in the action plan updates can be found as they are made on the website.
Thank you very much, Sandi and Hannah, for providing this information to the participants and giving us an update on the latest regulatory and risk reduction activities that are ongoing for PFAS in both of the countries. So that was helpful information for others to hear directly what's going on, and potentially also to where to find some more information on those activities. So thank you very much, and also thank you to both of you for waking up quite early in the morning in your time. And thanks for everybody who joined the webinar today as well, and hope to hear you again in the future on future webinars of the OECD PFAS webinar series. So have a good day to everyone.